Watch this.
Are you pleading guilty because you are guilty?
Yes.
That was the moment the man accused of killing 4 University of Idaho students in an off-campus home admitted to doing so. We'll break down what today's hearing was like from inside the courtroom.
We keep doing the same thing over and over again, and we keep getting the same outcome in terms of the dysfunctional two-party system in the federal government.
For Todd Achilles, that's the definition of insanity. Now the former Democratic lawmaker is trying to shake things up as an independent candidate for U.S. Senate. Lawmakers say it's about protecting kids. Critics say it's government overreach. Judges from the highest court in the land side with the former on online access to pornography.
With respect to count 1, burglary, felony, how do you plead, Mr. Kohberger, guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
As to count 2, the murder of Madison Mogen, how do you plead, guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
As to count 3, for the murder of Kaylee Gonzalez, how do you plead, guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
As to count 4, first-degree murder of Xana Kernodle, how do you plead, guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
As to count 5, the first-degree murder of Ethan Chapin, a human being, how do you plead, guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
Well, that was Brian Kohberger admitting to killing the 4 University of Idaho students last November, or of 2022, excuse me. The trial that was supposed to last months will never happen because of a plea deal to apparently avoid the possibility of a death penalty. What his sentence might be ultimately will not be known until July 23rd. A plea of guilty on all charges, as you just heard, does remove weeks of detailed, gruesome, and emotional testimony. The friends and family of Kaylee Gonzalez, Madison Mogen, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin would have had to sit through those weeks of testimony. But those emotions were still very evident today in that Ada County courtroom. Aspen Shumpert was in that courtroom today. And I want to start asking how you were able to get into that. Well, everybody wanted to get into that. How were you able to get in there this morning?
Yeah, early morning. I live not too far away from the courthouse, so I actually went over just before 6 a.m. to kind of scope it out. There were some other news stations getting set up outside.
Okay.
That line was forming of people wanting to get in, and it was first come, first serve. So I got a spot in that line, and then I went back because I initially had gone over in pajamas, tried to scope it out, got a spot, and then came back probably about an hour later, around 7:30-ish, got back in that line before the court opened their doors at 8 a.m. Then we went upstairs and waited outside of the actual hearing room today for about 3 hours before we were let in for the hearing.
And once you're in there, what was your vantage point? Could you see the participants, the accused, the parents of the victims?
Yeah, pretty good view of everyone in there today. If you go in, I was all the way to the left, which would be the side closest to Brian Kohberger, also directly behind his family that was there today.
Okay.
And then to the right of me, obviously the state and the victim's family is on the very far right side.
Safe to say the emotions were pretty high in that room?
Very high, especially talking about certain details of this case, bringing up the victims' names, talking about certain things in detail. Victims' families were emotional. At some point, we saw them crying. At other points, we saw them holding hands with each other, hugging each other throughout this about 40-minute hearing that we had this morning.
There was even some emotion from the prosecution.
There was.
I mean, if you're watching this live as it was streamed, you saw that. What was that about?
Yeah, the prosecution was talking about the evidence that they would have had and brought forward in this trial if this was going to go forward as a trial, talking about the night of the murders, talking about the 4 victims and getting emotional, talking about that night, speaking their names. He got choked up a little bit, grabbed some water, took a breath, and then continued to go through the evidence that they would have laid out.
Yeah, of course, this is a culmination of 2.5 years of investigations on their part and putting their case together. Moscow's a very tight community.
It is.
And so, yes, he lives in that community. He knows the families, or I should say, how it affected that community in a very deep and powerful way over these last 2.5 years. So I can see that emotion coming through. Where you sat behind Kohberger's parents.
Yep.
They were there.
They were there.
What did you see from them?
Yeah, they were 2 rows in front of me. They were in the very first row closest to Kohberger. Their backs were to me, so I can't say whether or not they shed any tears. It's possible. I couldn't see that from where I was sitting. They did share some hugs. At one point, you know, we saw them shaking a little bit. I think the mom was trying to hear everything that was being said, and especially her son admitting to these killings, pleading guilty. So not too much emotion coming from them, but reactions to hearing things inside today.
Any exchange of a glance or anything between the two?
No glances.
What was Kohberger's demeanor?
I would say typical from what we've seen throughout the last 2 years of him being in and out of courtrooms, very attentive to whoever was speaking, whether that be the judge or the state. Very short answers as usual: yes, no, guilty.
What was it like to hear him say this and admit to it publicly that he did these horrendous crimes?
I think going in there today, people not close to this case or trial maybe thought, are we going to hear him plead guilty today? Maybe a little anxiety over, is this going to happen? Is there something else that's going to happen today? And to hear him have to answer, did you deliberately, with premeditation and malice of forethought, stab Maddie Mogen?
Yes.
You know, and he had to answer these questions individually for each victim, and he repeatedly answered yes. There wasn't sounds or other things happening when he was answering, but it was tense. Okay. You could feel the emotion in the room, for sure.
Kind of touched on this, but hearing some of the stuff some people were hoping to hear with this trial, did we hear that today?
No. I would say it depends who you ask.
Okay.
We heard him admit to doing these killings. We heard him have to answer, yes, I understand that me pleading guilty means me saying, yes, I did that, and that's the truth, that I did do these. We didn't hear other details about why or murder weapon details and things like that, that I think some of the victims' families have expressed wanting to hear. So it was a short hearing. It was very much yes, no answers, guilty, how are you pleading?
You hear anything today that stood out to you?
I don't think anything that stood out to me.
That was more than we've already, okay.
A lot of the evidence that the state laid out that we probably would have heard during trial is things we knew about. Okay. Things we've heard before, so nothing really shocking, right? But hearing that answer of, yes, I did this, pleading guilty, is always going to be shocking to hear.
All right. Thank you very much, Aspen, for being in there and sharing your experiences in that courtroom. Of course, this isn't completely over just yet. The sentencing coming up on July 23rd. And we'll, of course, have more on the news at 6 and the news at 10 tonight. Thanks, Aspen.
You know, and I hear this from my Republican friends, my independent friends, my Democrat friends. Everybody's frustrated by sort of this slow decline in Idaho politics and this rise of extremist factions.
Democratic Representative Todd Achilles has been pondering this problem for at least the last few years, a widening divide in our two-party system, leaving a lot of Idahoans lost in the middle. And I should say former state representative Todd Achilles, and I should also say former Democratic Representative Todd Achilles, because as of yesterday, he stepped down from the state legislature in order to run for a U.S. Senate seat as an independent. Todd told us today he's been a lot of things in his life: a tank commander in the Army. He's worked in the tech industry for a number of years. He's been a teacher. And like most Idahoans, he says he's been a registered Republican and a registered Democrat at some point, but not completely comfortable in either party. He was appointed to fill Boise's District 16 Democratic seat in February of 2024 and won that seat outright that November, getting 60% of the votes in a district that is only 25% Democratic, which told him a lot about what most Idahoans want.
You know what I heard most when I was going door to door for the general election is, you're a better Republican than that other person on the ballot. And this informed a lot of my policy and where we're going now. Is folks are just looking for somebody that's just in the middle, that's pragmatic, that's common sense. And the two-party system is just causing so much dysfunction, particularly at the national level, that we've got just debts, division, deficits, all of these things that are going on, and we've got to break through that. We've got to do something different. As the parties go farther and farther into the corners, there's just this huge group of the electorate in the middle that says, just give me a sane, common sense, pragmatic alternative. And that's exactly, that's who I am, and that's what I want to try and do for Idahoans.
Achilles believes
I think we both believe we should have been more clear yesterday that our vote is not one of support for a bill, but just a commitment to the democratic process.
That's what he was doing during his tenure in the State House, by speaking and voting against several bills.
And it changed the initiative process when the Idaho Supreme Court has ruled unambiguously that the initiative process is a fundamental right for Idaho voters.
I think Idahoans, number one, we're independent at heart. Number two, we respect people's decisions and let folks live the way the lives they want to. And we respect the rule of law. There were several bills going through the legislature that were just fundamentally unconstitutional, and they wouldn't stand they wouldn't stand up in the courts.
Number one, this just clearly violates the supremacy clause of the Constitution. Right? Immigration law is federal law, and states don't get to overwrite that.
I raised my hand a lot on that. I raised my hand on bills like the effort to try and overturn gay marriage, House Joint Memorial 1.
This is just a letter. It has no force of law. The courts are going to toss it in the trash. It really accomplishes nothing. It's a waste of time and money.
That was just fundamentally counter to Idaho values. And so it died. And that was one of my wins of the session. I will say, I think I was far more successful in this second session than I was in my first one, because I spent more time talking to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. And listen, we may disagree on 70% of the stuff, but there's that 30 where we're on the same page and just figuring out where you align and when you align. Because of my party affiliation in the legislature, I was consciously not speaking with colleagues, Republican colleagues on the House floor, because people would be filming us talking. And they would use that against my Republican colleagues, that they were talking to a Democrat. It's incredibly counterproductive. And that's not, that's not how we solve problems.
Why not run for an office in Idaho as opposed to trying to go for the Senate?
We just think the opportunity is now that the incumbent in there doesn't represent Idaho, and particularly when it comes to the economic issues. So you've got one of the oldest and one of the wealthiest people in the Senate representing Idaho when economic equality is off the charts. If you're a millennial or Gen Z in this state, you don't have a chance. The American dream is completely out of reach. All of these things that we've built to create a more equitable economy, they're out the door. And that's a function of just sustained laws passed in Congress, and we've just chipped away at the economic opportunity in this country. And we've got to reverse that, or we're already at these really dangerous levels of economic inequality.
When somebody is in the voting booth and they go down the list and they see Republican, Democrat, Independent, I mean, how many times do people look at that Independent and go, outlier? I don't really know much about them. I don't know enough. They could go any direction.
Yeah.
Are you worried about that?
If I do a good job, people are going to go down that ballot and they're going to say, oh, thank God, an independent.
Well, independents are the second highest category voters in Idaho, just shy of a third of all registered voters in the state. While independents and third-party voters are the fastest growing group in the country, up from 23% to 32% in just 25 years. Idaho's Democratic Party was disappointed by his decision, Achilles said, but they have different priorities and objectives at this point. They are currently taking applicants to fill Achilles' vacant seat. 3 candidates must be submitted to Governor Brad Little by Sunday, July 6th, and the governor then will select Achilles' replacement. Achilles says he will run against sitting Idaho Republican Senator Jim Risch, who's been in Washington since 2009, and Risch will be 83 years old in 2026. No ID, no entry. Porn sites have already pulled the plug in Idaho after a crackdown on age verification. A move now supported by all 3 branches of government. We feel supported and verified when you join the 208 conversation. Send us your take on what you've seen or what you'd like to see at 208-321-5614. Add the hashtag the 208 and your name, and if it's snappy, we might share it at the end of the show. Sometimes telling a person, or a kid specifically, no only makes them want to do it more, or at least try to. That's the digital dilemma faced with online pornography, trying to build a gate tall enough to keep kids out without blocking the rights of adults who want to walk right through. An Idaho law that went into effect July 1st of last year requires online pornography publishers and distributors to require age verification to prevent minors from accessing harmful material on the internet. That law mirrored the one that was challenged in Texas, saying it goes against the First Amendment rights. And now, as Hunter Funk explains, nearly a year later, the U.S. Supreme Court has made their decision.
The internet has no bedtime, no parental locks that stick, and no bouncer asking for an ID at the digital door. That's what laws like this aim to change. Julianne Young.
I come with the perspective of being a mom.
She was the driving force behind Idaho's effort to implement age verification guidelines when it comes to porn.
One of the things that's the most harmful to families is exposure to children of obscene content. And so when I saw this legislation, I knew that it was something important for us to do in Idaho to protect our kids.
Idaho's law is nearly identical to the one implemented in Texas, and dozens of states, including Utah, Kansas, Indiana, and Montana, have enacted a similar policy. Within hours of it taking effect on July 1st, 2024, major websites like Pornhub shut off access altogether in the Gem State, saying it could put your privacy at risk, that the decision will drive traffic to sites with far fewer safety measures, and that they've made the difficult decision to completely disable access to Idaho's website. 1 year later, that same message still stands, even after the Supreme Court just upheld Texas's law requiring websites with a third or more sexual content to verify users' age with government ID or financial records in a 6-3 decision. The court says it's not an unconstitutional block on adult free speech. Young says protecting children from graphic material isn't just policy, it's personal.
People don't realize the harm that's done when a child's exposed to obscene material because it changes the way they see other people and relationships, including their relationship with themselves.
It's a loss for an adult entertainment industry trade group called the Free Speech Coalition and the ACLU, who responded by saying, quote, "With this decision, the court has carved out an unprincipled pornography exception to the First Amendment. The Constitution should protect adults' rights to access information about sex online, even if the government thinks it is too inappropriate for children to see." But now, Idaho, along with other states, stand on firmer footing to implement the law.
Anytime we're operating in these areas where there's social conflict over who has what rights, we expect that there will be some legal battles. And so that wasn't unexpected. That's part of the reason that you'll see those types of legislation be very tightly written and often really similar across different states.
Young says the law gives websites flexibility on how they verify age, whether that's uploading an ID, linking a credit card, or using a third-party system.
And I'm just so grateful we're having a chance to address it and raise public awareness.
Of course, no law stops curiosity. Kids are savvy, VPNs are available, but lawmakers say they are giving parents and families a tool, and at least now a precedent backed by the highest court in the land.
Okay, what's interesting is you were saying this could have a broader interpretation when it comes to sex education.
Yeah, so it covers, if a site covers 1/3 possible pornography, that is where it causes some issues. So like a sexual education course for kids, they're going to need their parents to maybe log in and verify themselves to be able to use that site.
If sex education involves learning about pornography.
Yes. Or just learning about the body.
Gotcha.
Or nudity.
And it's an online course.
Yes.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
You know.
enforcement is still combing the remote areas of Washington state for signs of Travis Decker. That's the man accused of killing his 3 daughters. And the Ford Idaho Center could have a new owner. Here's Brenda Rodriguez with the 411.
The search for accused killer Travis Decker has entered its 2nd month. Investigators say that evidence found at the crime scene where his 3 daughters were found murdered links him to their deaths. Peyton, Evelyn, and Olivia were found near a campsite west of Leavenworth last month. Police confirmed 2 bloody handprints found at the scene match Decker's DNA. Search teams have been using canines and cadaver dogs to help track him down in the mountains of Chelan and Kittitas County. Now the National Park Service is planning to send swift water rescue teams to search nearby lakes and rivers. KTFTR signal in the Magic Valley and Sun Valley viewing area was temporarily off air earlier today after a bullet hit and damaged a fiber line. But after repairs, it is back on air. If you ever lose service or are unable to access your regular channel, you can always watch what's happening live on KTVB+. And a major change could be coming to one of Idaho's biggest event spaces. The city of Nampa and the College of Western Idaho are in talks to transfer ownership of the Ford Idaho Center to the college. They say that this move would expand career programs and keep the facility publicly running with even more opportunities for growth. You'll have a chance to hear from both sides at a town hall on July 15th from 4 to 6 p.m. at the Les Schwab Corral. And if you're looking for a place to safely celebrate the 4th of July, here's a list of some fireworks shows in our area. In Boise, you can head on over to Ann Morrison Park. The fireworks are scheduled to start at 10:15. Over in Meridian, the fun kicks off at Story Park with fireworks set to go off at 10:20. The city of Nampa will host a fireworks show tomorrow at the Ford Idaho Center at around 10 o'clock. And the Caldwell firework display will be held at Brothers Park at dusk. That's a 411. I'm Brenda Rodriguez.
Let's wrap up this Wednesday with your comments. Deborah would like to know, or would like Kohberger to say why he did these killings. That's the downside of a plea deal. We may never know the reason why this happened. It's not like anyone didn't know he was going to plead guilty to the murders at today's hearing. I was so profoundly disappointed he wasn't provided the dignity, or he was provided the dignity of a dress shirt and tie. Hope to see him dressed as the monster he is, wearing orange and chains at the sentencing hearing. I don't think that's how it works, Tony. Today he has not been sentenced, therefore not supposed to wear what you wear in prison. Idaho values in the Great Divide, fully behind Todd. We need a voice from the middle, says Bill in Eagle. More laws from people who don't understand the internet. Parents shouldn't rest easy. This law will just drive kids to worse and worse sites. Parents can't pass the responsibility to monitor their kids to the state. That's Mark in Boise. Meanwhile, Boise Brad says, I want kids to learn about sex the old-fashioned way, like I did on a dirty street corner by a stranger. That sounds like a crime was committed. Are you all right? We'll be back another day.